A lot of territory covered so far. We ended the first portion of the questioning with the last two senators being able to ask their questions, and now they've entered the second round of questioning. So far, we've heard Judge Jackson's judicial philosophy come up once again, as well as some of her record in sentencing and some more on her family history. Let's bring in senior Washington reporter Devin Dwyer live in the committee room, along with politics reporter Brittany Shepard and ABC News Supreme Court contributor Kate Shaw, who's here with me in studio. Kate, I want to start with you. What's your take on how things are going today compared to yesterday?
I think that Judge Jackson had a really strong start, and I think that's in part because the junior senator from Georgia, Jon Ossoff, the youngest member of the youngest member of the Senate who's before the committee, and this is his first Supreme Court confirmation, I think was extremely effective in, a couple of ways. One, he gave Judge Jackson the opportunity to talk about her brother, which was very powerful, but she took that opportunity. She talked about her family. Her brother went to Howard, was a police officer, enlisted in the military after 9/11. And she used that story to talk about both his experience as a police officer and her experience as a public defender, his experience in the military and her experience defending detainees at Guantanamo as actually two sides of the same coin, as not in fundamental tension, that all of this is about America, our democracy, our Constitution, and its values. And there's not really any tension between the path she took and the path that her brother took. And I thought that was just such a powerful, both personal kind of story and also story about her vision of the country and the Constitution.
And Devin, there was some commotion, you can call it, at the start of the hearing this morning, with Republican senators taking issue with what they called editorializing by Chairman Dick Durbin and how he's using his extra time as chairman. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that was about?
Yeah, there are always some political fireworks between the parties, and you saw Judge Jackson sort of sit there quietly. It didn't involve her, but Republicans sort of raising the red flag, saying that each time one of their senators had finished questioning Judge Jackson, Chairman Durbin, as is his prerogative as the chairman of the committee, sort of piped in on his own and offered some sort of impromptu rebuttals. We heard complaints from Republicans saying that's really not fair. That's not how it works. You don't get all this extra time to rebut each and every one of us. So he committed to sort of giving back some of his time of questioning, which he did. He only won about 7 minutes of his 20 minutes. But those sorts of fireworks on the fringes of this hearing are common. We saw some late last night as well. But for the most part, as Kate alluded to, a really strong start today for Ketanji Brown Jackson. I dare even say, Diane, sort of night and day in terms of her demeanor, her charisma. Today, her ease. She seemed much more confident and relaxed today, animated, using her hands in answering these questions. Even saw her flash a smile a few times. She told the committee she didn't get a lot of sleep last night, but it does seem like she's much more comfortable now. And one of her two daughters is back here today after neither of them were here yesterday. One of them is back sitting right behind her. So clearly on her way now, about 6-7 hours from wrapping up what could be her final appearance before this committee.
And Brittany, as Kate mentioned, Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff had asked Judge Jackson about her family's role in law enforcement. And she not only talked about her brother's role in the military, but also the fact that he became a Baltimore police officer and how that impacted the family, and sort of seemed to not contrast that, but show that as a complement to her work as a public defender, for example, and her work defending criminals in the courts. What did you think of that exchange, and why do you think that's a point that Democrats are trying to focus on?
Well, Diane, Republicans have been adamant to paint Ketanji Brown Jackson as soft on crime. We saw a little bit today, and we saw a lot of it yesterday. So in this attempt to contextualize her family, it's a bit of a bolster to those attacks to show that, look, just because I am black and come from a historically black university and have family members who are police officers, that doesn't mean that I am in conflict with wanting to protect the greater good. I mean, it's something that we see play on the national stage all the time with the attacks about critical race theory and about defunding the police. And I think we saw something really measured from Judge Jackson, trying to make the appeal that she is someone who both understands the front lines as a public defender, but also someone who's a family of a law enforcement agent, something that Republicans have been shy to bring up and Democrats have been eager to get in front of Republicans, especially those vulnerable Republicans who might be leaning maybe yes, no on the vote for her larger next week.
She was also asked about the limits of presidential power, which she then expanded into a larger answer about the separation of powers in general. Let's take a listen to that.
You, in opinion that has been widely cited, made the observation that presidents are not kings. What does that mean, and what are some of the most important bulwarks in our constitutional system against the abuse of executive power, against tyranny?
Our constitutional scheme, the design of our government, is erected to prevent tyranny. The framers decided, after experiencing monarchy, tyranny, and the like, that they were going to create a government that would split the powers of a monarch in several different ways. The separation of powers is crucial to liberty. It is what our country is founded on, and it's important, as consistent with my judicial methodology, for each branch to operate within their own sphere. That means for me that judges can't make law. Judges shouldn't be policymakers. That's a part of our constitutional design, and it prevents our government from being too powerful and encroaching on individual liberty.
So, Kate, we're hearing Jackson again here stressing that there are spheres and lanes within which judges and courts have to stay, that there are limits on the power of the courts and judges. Why is that a point that she continues to hammer home? And could that kind of give any clues to her thinking when it pertains to any cases that are coming before the court?
Yeah, so Judge Jackson has returned again and again to this theme that judges have a limited role in our constitutional scheme. And of course, that's right. And it's also, I think, a very effective rejoinder to any accusations of judicial activism. She said, no, judges have by design limitations the Constitution places on them. And yet, though judges are limited, they're not supposed to be making policy. When they are within their spheres, when they're deciding what the Constitution means or what it allows, judges have a tremendous amount of power. And I think that in cases like the McGahn case, which Senator Ossoff referenced, Judge Jackson has shown that she is perfectly willing to hold that other government actors have exceeded their power if they have violated the Constitution or their constraints the Constitution places on them. So in that case, Don McGahn argued that as the president's former lawyer, he couldn't be compelled to testify. He was absolutely immune. And that's the opinion in which she wrote, no, presidents are not kings and their staff members work for we the people. And so, I think that while she very much is taking the position that judges have limited power, they absolutely have very significant authority when they're acting within their lanes. And I think if there are cases that come before her on the Supreme Court involving things like assertions of absolute presidential power or immunity, she would be perfectly willing to find that those claims are not supported by the Constitution.
Do you see any cases where that might come up?
You know, there are cases kind of arising in different ways out of the January 6th events. There's civil litigation against President Trump by a number of individuals, family members of Capitol Police officers and members of Congress, essentially alleging incitement of violence. Some of those cases survived a motion to dismiss in the district court in D.C. Against, absolute immunity claims by former President Trump. So I don't know if any of those cases could come to the Supreme Court, but certainly there's a chance that they could. So these questions are not abstract. They very much could be before the court, and other January 6th related cases involving the committee potentially could also come to the court. So she could be deciding these cases, and I think, she would view the role of the court as limited, but certainly sometimes in that limited role, the court has to answer the most important constitutional questions that we face.
Right. It seems like she also, in a way, was trying to make clear, yes, presidential powers are limited, so are all the other branches of government. And meanwhile, Justice Clarence Thomas is still in the hospital recovering from an infection. Devin, what's the latest on his condition?
Yeah, surprising, Diane. Now 5 nights in the hospital. He was admitted, remember, Friday evening for what the Supreme Court told us late Sunday was an infection that's being treated with antibiotics. We've been told he's resting comfortably. His symptoms are abating, but now 5 days in the hospital. That's a lengthy hospital stay for anybody right now. We've been told it's not COVID related, but no further explanation has been given as to what his condition is at this hour, why he's being held there, when he's expected to be released. So we continue to monitor that development. Remember, Clarence Thomas is the oldest conservative justice on the Supreme Court, 73 years old. He, is an icon in conservative circles. No indication that, he's in imminent harm, if you will. We were told he was expected to be released in just a few days, but people are watching very, very closely, given what it could mean if he is, in any way facing a more serious illness, Diane.
And Senator Thom Tillis asked Judge Jackson about defendants that she sentenced who later became reoffenders. Let's listen to that exchange.
If I take a look at your responses to some of my colleagues' questions and your statements to some of the defendants, it seems as though you're a very kind person and that there's at least a level of empathy that enters into your treatment of a defendant that some could view as a maybe beyond what some of us would be comfortable with respect to administering justice.
Thank you for letting me clarify. The statements that I made about my practices as a trial judge, which I'm no longer a trial judge, but were intended to explain how trial judges operate and how they impose sentences within the framework that Congress has provided. The statute that applies to us tells us to look at all of the various factors that Congress has set forward, including the nature and circumstances of the offense. Congress also tells us that one of the purposes of punishment is rehabilitation. My attempts to communicate directly with defendants is about public safety, because most of the people who are incarcerated via the federal system and even via the state system will come out, will be a part of our communities again. And so it is to our entire benefit, as Congress has recognized, to ensure that people who come out stop committing crimes.
Now, Jackson, in that exchange, also said that a key part of her process is to explain to the defendant why their crime is a serious one, because she said, as her experience as a defender, that many times these criminals were actually bitter and didn't understand why, for example, a drug offense was a serious one. Tillis then responded that virtually half of those people she gave that speech to were back in prison within 8 years. So, Brittany, what did you make of this exchange?
Well, Diane, it definitely seemed like a way for Tillis to try to figure out whether or not that he was a soft no or a hard yes on her nomination. I think that it was I think that Ketanji Brown Jackson handled it as interesting as she could. I never really have heard empathy weaponized in the halls of Congress, but I guess there's a first time for everything. And it was not just her pitch to the members of the committee, but also to the American public who are watching, who are wondering, and who are scared about rising crime rates around the country if a certain case was presented to her and the other members of the Supreme Court, if she is, in fact, made a historic member. If they should be worried about what would happen in their local municipalities. And I think that she did a good job of walking Thom Tillis and the other members of the committee through exactly her reasoning of why it's important to be empathetic, especially as the criminal justice laws in this country change by Congress's own hands, and is becoming more and more sympathetic towards first-time nonviolent offenders.
And Devin, Ranking Member Grassley asked whether nationwide injunctions were constitutional. Judge Jackson kind of danced around that. She explained that invalidating a rule that an agency has enacted is not necessarily a nationwide injunction. Can you put that into context for us?
Well, conservatives and conservative members of the current Supreme Court have lashed out at these district court judges, that's the lowest level of federal judge in this country, sort of issuing pronouncements that affect the whole country from their decisions. And that's sort of what he was driving at, is trying to get Judge Jackson to go on the record taking a position on these injunctions. She explained, though, sometimes when these policies affect the entire country, if it is deemed, unconstitutional, or if there's a reason to put a hold on something based on how it's, how it was passed and implemented under the Administrative Procedures Act. That's just kind of the way it is, was essentially her answer. But certainly that's a flashpoint for conservatives, much in the same way that the word empathy, by the way, is a flashpoint with conservatives. Tom Tillis going at her with that word sort of very diplomatically. He didn't have the bite that some of the Republicans did yesterday, but that, as Brittany was alluding to, is very much a buzzword in conservative circles right now. Judges, they say, shouldn't be bringing empathy to the bench, to their decisions. She pushed back, saying that it's a smart way to treat defendants, humane way to treat defendants. It's been one of her hallmarks. I've heard from her clerks that she very much believes in making sure people who come before her as a judge understand why they're there, why she's ruling the way she's ruling, what it means for them, even if they've done horrible crimes. And I think that's what she was driving at in that opinion. But we're about to see, Diane, whether or not Republicans will really keep up the firepower that they brought against her yesterday. Lindsey Graham is up next, and we all saw the spectacle that unfolded when he started asking questions yesterday and then ultimately stormed out of the room.
Yeah, it stormed out. It seemed more toward the chairman than toward Jackson herself. I think that was part of the conversation that we saw this morning, with Republicans taking issue with the chairman's so-called editorializing, in their words. But yeah, Lindsey Graham always puts on a bit of a show, right? We always are interested to hear what certain senators tend to put on a bit more drama in these than others. Lindsey Graham coming up next. There was another part of the hearing that I found particularly interesting, and this was a line of questioning having to do with freedom of speech and the First Amendment in general. And we heard Judge Jackson, Kate, say, stressing defining the First Amendment and stressing the importance of the First Amendment, but then also explaining the exception of if speech is meant to incite violence, that is where it no longer is protected under the Constitution. But barring that, it is very important that people be allowed to express themselves. Why this line of questioning by Jon Ossoff? What are they trying to get at, or what is he at least trying to get up here with asking her about this?
Yeah, she was asked a couple of times about different important First Amendment cases. So Brandenburg versus Ohio, this important case that basically says the default is in our Constitution is in favor of protecting speech, but there are certain types of speech that can be so damaging and so destructive that they fall outside of the protection of the First Amendment. And incitement is one of the few examples of that kind of unprotected speech. But the law has basically said, in order for speech to fall outside of the First Amendment, we have to be really sure that it's not about communicating ideas, it's really about doing harm. So in order to qualify as incitement, speech has to be intended to cause and likely to cause imminent lawless action. That's the formula. And that's actually a case that President Trump invoked in his impeachment defense. Routinely, he said, I could never be criminally prosecuted for the statements I gave on the ellipse prior to the riot at the Capitol. And so the First Amendment protects anything I said on that day. So it's, and as the January 6th investigation continues, there will be questions about accountability and protection for speech. So that's very much a quite relevant case. And New York Times versus Sullivan is another one that came up. That's a longstanding protection that Judge Jackson spoke to for the press, right? Basically suggesting that if there are errors and mistakes that creep into, press coverage, only if something called an actual malice standard is satisfied can there be liability for those kinds of errors that the press may commit in, the ordinary coverage. Right. And it's an important protection. And so she spoke to both of those, and both of those cases have been questioned by various members of the Supreme Court, in particular New York Times versus Sullivan. So the doctrine, could be subject to reexamination. But they're both really important sort of First Amendment cases, and I like the law school clinic that she seemed to be putting on in response to some of those questions.
It does feel like we learn more about the law just in watching these hearings, and we just saw Judge Jackson walking through the hallways, making her way to the hearing room. Devin, what are you looking out for as these questions, this period of questioning resumes?
Well, I'm looking to see, Diane, whether the attacks that Republicans launched yesterday will keep the same momentum, whether Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley will continue to go at her at some of the same lines of questions on the child porn cases and critical race theory that they brought up yesterday. Will that continue, or will they dial it back now and pivot away? And we will see in very short order just which way they're going to go. I think it certainly will define the rest of the second day of questioning.
And Brittany, any particular areas or topics you're looking to hear about?
Beyond looking and seeing what Cotton Cruz and Hawley are going to say, I am in particular interest of how the historic moment of this nomination is going to be captured. You know, we heard Jon Ossoff give Ketanji Brown Jackson a little bit of that time today, but as the first black member of the Supreme Court, you cannot overstate the importance to other black and brown lawyers, little kids, brothers, sisters, family members around the world who are eager to tune in. So curious how she characterized that and other members of the committee characterize it for the next, let's say, 7 hours that we have left.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.